Like, I would rather rent than not be able to do anything. Yeah, you might buy a house, but if you're borrowing 95% of it, like, you haven't bought you've really bought nothing. You've bought yourself a massive debt. And guess what? When the hot water system blows up, you pay 100%. You pay everything. Like, any maintenance issue, it's all on you.
We've got some fresh new young talent doing some things that I know you haven't heard before.
1, 2, 3, listen.
Welcome to the Young Minds podcast, hosted by Bourke Britton Financial Partners. I'm Brady.
I'm Daniel.
This podcast helps young adults build confidence and clarity when it comes to money, empowered by youth, inspired by experience. We know that navigating the world of finance in your late teens to 20s can feel overwhelming, whether it's understanding your first pay slip, learning how to invest, managing student debt, or just trying to save without missing out on life. Because believe it or not, it is actually possible.
That's why this podcast is here, to make finance more accessible, more understandable, and way more relevant to your life right now. Each episode will break down key financial concepts, give you practical tips you can actually use, and have real conversations about money. From budgeting and credit scores to purchasing your first home, we'll cover it all.
As university students coming to the end of our degrees, we created this podcast not because we have all the answers, but because we're asking the same questions you are. Each episode will be accompanied by a qualified financial advisor from the Bourke Britton Financial Practice to provide insight and guidance in the topics to come. No confusing words, no lectures, just honest insight to help you make smarter money moves now and in the future.
So whether you're studying, working, or figuring things out, you're in the right place. Accompanying us today for the first time is Ben, qualified financial advisor here. So welcome, Ben.
Thank you, guys. I was always wanted to be on the other side of this and be a guest, but then now I'm a little bit intimidated by you two. Maybe. I don't know why.
You run them.
I know, that's what I mean. Normally I'm asking the questions and I've got the guests and I can just sit back and listen. And now I've got to get put to the test. So it's good. Thank you for having me on. I'm feeling a little bit old getting invited to the Young Minds podcast. I was always the young one, but definitely not anymore. So thank you. And I think this is a great idea. It's something we've talked about a lot. So I'm keen to be involved.
So today's mostly about first home buyers, getting into your first property. So maybe just giving us an overall rundown of maybe what the first home buyers scheme is.
Good question. Yeah, I suppose the thing will want to preference this with is that your mortgage broker is still going to be your best friend when it comes to knowing these absolutely inside out and linking them back to your personal situation. But as we've probably found is, as financial advisors, planners, that we sort of touch on most areas and we often pull together those people. So for many, the first home buyer scheme is confusing. It's state by state. That's probably one component to it. So if we talk about Victoria primarily, where most of our clients are, there are some government, federal government schemes also. But as it stands at the moment, and as it has been for a long time, the simple part of it, people think about the first homeowners grant and actually getting given some money to buy a house. You only get something if you build a new house, essentially, in really simple terms. So a lot of people don't do that. There was a period of time where a lot of people were, but it sort of has gone away a bit at the moment because of the cost of construction. So a lot of people find they're buying existing property. And the biggest thing with that is essentially just a stamp duty exemption fully up to $600,000 and then it phases out up to $750,000. The probably disappointing part of that is that it's been that threshold for it's probably getting close to a decade. Like it's been a very long time that those figures haven't changed. So $600,000 doesn't get you a whole heap anymore. It can still get you something in the right location, but the concessions are somewhat modest, I would say. And there's probably a whole debate around whether that should be improved or not, because what we've seen in the past, even when those concessions came in, is that prices of property really skyrocketed off the back of it because you brought more people into the marketplace. So if you've got more buyers, you still don't have a great supply of properties, prices go up. So again, you can see sort of government intervention is trying, but maybe failing to try and level this out. I think the key thing is take control of yourself. You can bitch and moan about any scheme and options, but ultimately, if you understand what you've got and what you can do, you'll be okay. So hopefully we can sort of go down that thread more so today.
Thank you for that. All right, well, we'll start with sort of the first thing everyone's sort of wondering. How do you get into the scheme? How do you get a deposit? What is a deposit? Give us a bit of a rundown.
So in terms of just deposits in general, so people always think about, okay, I've got to save up a crazy amount of money to be able to even think about looking at getting a property, which is true. I always start with the conversation with clients that traditionally, and you think about what the bank wants to see, is the bank wants to see a minimum of 20% deposit. Now, if we use that $600,000 sort of property as the example today, that's $120,000 that you've got to save, which for most people just hearing that, they're going to think, well, I'm never ever going to buy a property. So, and that's at 600,000, which there's probably not a whole heap of $600,000 properties anymore. So ideal world, the bank wants to see that you've saved up 20%. And if you think about it, like logically, they want to go, okay, these people can save money, they're doing well with their cash flow, they're going to be able to also then pay me back or pay us back or whatever we've lent to them. The reality is that most people don't hit 20% anymore, unless they get a significant assistance from their family or something like that, which we'll talk about also. So you've got to find a different way to meet that requirement. Now, banks will lend to you more than the 80% balance, but they also then come with conditions, which is where some of the newer, really, really recent government stuff comes into the fold around mortgage insurance and LMI and these things. So again, without going down that rabbit hole, if you have 20%, then there's no additional surcharge that goes with the loan for that. The bank's sort of comfortable with that. If you have less than 20%, that's where the LMI kicks in, which is essentially like a fat bill to compensate the bank for the risk of taking you on with a lower deposit. So most people have to sort of realign their goals around their deposit and say, okay, I'm going to aim for 10 or I'm going to aim for 15. Or it also comes back to, and a lot of the stuff we do with clients and looking at it more broadly is like, what's an actual fair and reasonable budget to spend? So go back a step altogether. I'll actually tell people to go out and actually go through houses and physically see them way before they're ready to buy, because they've got to see if they can actually see themselves living there. Like, could you actually live in that place? Sometimes that has two effects. They realize they could actually spend a bit less. Sometimes they realize, no, we probably actually would need to spend more, especially if they've got, pets or kids or whatever their situation is. So sometimes you've got to really get out there and have a look at it and then work your numbers through and work out, okay, that deposit's different for every single property as well. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So again, deposits is saving, which you've talked about a bit already on other episodes, a bit around saving versus investing. The challenge for young people is that when you're trying to save up to build a home, you don't necessarily want to invest a whole heap of those funds because you're just trying to be really defensive, save it up as cash and have it ready and available. So you're trying to pick up sort of some interest on it and high interest savings or maybe term deposits, but you don't want to add a lot of risk into that unless your time frame is really long. So saving this is the grunt work, and this is the hardest part. And it's where a lot of people, I think, throw the towel in before they've even started, because they just look at it and think, oh, I'm never going to save $120,000, $150,000, which potentially they won't, or it will take a long time. But what else could you do to make it work?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you mentioned the bank obviously wanting to check that you can service the loan. It's not just about always, I guess, having a deposit. It's about, can you service that loan? So how would someone go about borrowing the money from the bank or even just measuring their serviceability?
Good question. Again, I feel like a little bit of a broker today, so hopefully I do them justice. But this is, again, where we tag in on those fronts. So if I think about the traditional experience, client comes in, tells me they want to buy a home, we do a bit of whiteboarding, some ideas, and we talk about their cash flow, work out roughly maybe they've got some deposit or they're working towards it. Then going to the broker, and all the banks have different ways they calculate that too. And I think it would be good, you guys would benefit if you had a broker come in and just do a session just around this, because it's quite a complicated section. They want to know what people are spending, what are they saving. Again, it's all filtering back. If you take a step back and go, okay, why do they want to know that? They want to know if they lend you $400,000, $500,000, $600,000. Are these people good for it? Like, are they going to give it back? So that's why they're going through that process. They're making sure that you give them comfort that you could service it and pay it back. So serviceability, in simple terms, in my mind, is just how much they're going to allow you to borrow. So a big problem for people is sometimes getting their deposit together, but for other people, it's actually serviceability. So sometimes I've seen clients that have received a lump sum, an inheritance or windfall gain, whatever it was, but their work situation is not really steady. The bank doesn't like that. So they might be casual, or they're part-time, or they're variable of income due to commissions or other structures in their pay. The bank doesn't like that. The bank wants just every fortnight, every month, the same amount rolling in. So sometimes we see people have great deposits and poor serviceability. So it's not always deposit based. Sometimes serviceability can be an issue. And in recent years, it's become a lot more of an issue for single people, because the way that the system and the calculation, is formulated, that single people find it harder with rising rates, or had rates at a higher level than they were, to actually service and to be then ticked off by the bank to borrow money. So again, the brokers, that's their work. They go out. The variance between different banks is quite surprising. Like it can be tens of thousands of dollars of difference in serviceability. So that's where the broker goes to work and works out who will lend you the money, because you want a broad range of lenders, because that creates competition in terms of interest rates and you getting better terms as well. You don't want to be like, oh, we've only got one, because if there's only one who's lending to you, those terms are probably not going to be the best terms.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So we briefly touched on earlier about seeking assistance from family, getting some help with the financial side of servicing a loan. And there's also something called a guarantor. Touch on that for us. What is it?
Good question. There's two key differences. So family assistance, generally speaking, is a gift or a secondary loan from a family member or friend. So that's saying, okay, I've saved 10%. My mum and dad or whatever are going to give me 10%. Now I've got my 20% deposit and I'll go to the bank and borrow the other 80. So literally they've just given you the shortfall of deposit. The other way they can do it is they can be a guarantor, and they can essentially promise that you will pay that money back by using one of their own assets as security. So it's not just a nice letter, like it's not a reference letter. It's actually going, oh, I've got a house, mum and dad have got a property that's got no debt or limited debt, and they will sign the security of that asset over as the guarantee for the shortfall in your loan. It does vary a fair bit. That has changed a lot in recent years. It used to be they guarantored the whole loan. Most of the time now, they just guarantor the shortfall. So if you bought a house for $600,000 and you had 10%, the guarantor would be on the other 10% to get you to the 20%, and then your security on the other 80% would be against your property, which gives the guarantoring party a lot more comfort as well, because they're not guarantoring $540,000 loan. They're just guarantoring 60 potentially. The whole idea of that is it's trying to get people ahead where they maybe need that extra boost, or they have people who want to help them either with guarantor or funds. One of the focuses then is to try and get rid of that guarantor. So getting rid of it means you pay the loan down to a point where you didn't need a guarantor anymore, or it grows in value to the point where you now own 20% of the property, potentially, again, with a few variances. That's the simple option. So that's where guarantor is different. So if you have a guarantor, you still got to borrow the money. And this is where the government scheme worries me a bit, because what they're doing is sort of like a guarantor and reducing and getting rid of the LMI component. But if you borrow, people are going to borrow 95% of the property value. So people who are struggling to save already only have a 5% deposit are now borrowing 95%, so they pretty much owe nearly the whole value of that property. So now they've got a really large loan. If you've got a big loan like that, it can be challenging to move between banks and to get a good rate, and they're probably going to struggle to save because they've got a big loan. So I really worry about that. I think there'll be circumstances where it fits people's needs, but I worry when people have a really high portion of debt. That property value doesn't need to decrease by very much, and they actually owe more than the property is worth. And if you take into account selling expenses and purchasing expenses, potentially they, from day one, they don't own a dollar of that property. The bank does, or probably even more concerning, potentially the government in some of the schemes as well, which I think, I get it. It's not possible for everyone, but I think our job is to explore every other avenue before you get to that, if that makes sense.
Who actually can be eligible to be a guarantor?
I think anyone can technically do it, but I could only think of a handful of scenarios where it's not been mum and dad, maybe grandparents, or maybe a sibling I have seen as well. But it's sort of anyone who's willing to put their name to it to an extent. Most people aren't. Even parents, I would never push a client or push them to convince their parent to do it. A lot of parents just don't have any interest, and I completely respect that. Like, if they've built them up to that position where they should be able to sort of take that next leap on their own, then they think that's their right. Like, they had to do it, then they have to. Again, there's a lot of personal, there's a cultural sort of view to it. Like, there's a lot of different things that go into it. So when we talk to those clients, no one really knows on the day from that first consultation, like which way they might go. It's just going, here's all your options. Here's what you need to do now. Go and have some conversations with your parents. Or sometimes we often have the other side of it where we're talking to the parents and they're talking about trying to help their kids. And this is where the key between the deposit and serviceability guarantor, like that sort of breakdown of those areas, that's where we often do a lot of work too, is they want to help their kids, but giving their kids $100,000 might actually do nothing. We might sound crazy, but if they give them $100,000, it might not matter because they've got poor serviceability. So sometimes that you can't fix that problem. Then you got to try and that's something that the individual, the borrower, has to work on. So that's their income and their expenses.
So just a little bit more clarity around that. Your guarantor can't be your best mate who's got no assets. It has to be someone who's got enough, like a big enough pool of assets to cover that.
Yeah, essentially they're like putting another mortgage on that component of the house. So if you think about it, like, you know, let's say the parents own a house that's worth $700,000 and they own nothing on it, they're putting a guarantor against a small portion of that property. So they want security of something. So the bank's always thinking, if things go pear-shaped, what can I claw back? So yeah, someone saying like, yeah, I'll get guarantor for you, I trust you, like, doesn't fly. Like, they actually want to take some title and some skin out of something else to verify that. So that's that process of like understanding what that means. And a lot of parents might want to be guarantors, but a lot of times now we see where like people having mortgages later into life, so they don't necessarily have a property that has no debt, or they don't necessarily have a property that has the equity available in it. 'Cause sometimes they might only owe another $100,000 on their property. So they do have equity and availability to do it. But as soon as you have two different banks trying to tie two different mortgages against the same property, you often run into trouble as well. The key is it's complicated. So you need to, if you're starting to think about that, you should have and would have had multiple conversations about other things before you even get to that phase. Like sometimes it's the other way around. The parent goes, "Oh yeah, we'll guarantor you," but no one's thought about anything other than that. And then you got to go, okay, well, could you even do it? Should you do it? Why would you do it? Like going right back through that process.
Leading into maybe pre-approval now. So it's been thrown around a few times just in regards to what it is you have to go get pre-approval before you purchase a home. Maybe if you could just touch on what that is, what it means, and what the implications are if you don't, and say you go to an auction or something like that without pre-approval.
You definitely don't want to end up at auction throwing your hand in the air. The crossover of conveyancing and agents and advocates and brokers into this response a little bit. But I think the key thing with pre-approval is it's like a hypothetical scenario. It's like you go to the bank and you say, like, how about it? Like, what would you do for me if I was to have, I've got this much savings and this is my income. How much would you lend me? And they would say, okay, we give you approval that you could go to auction or make an offer up to this price level. So it's maybe 600, 700, whatever that figure is. Now, some people don't have full pre-approvals before they go and make offers on properties, but then it becomes back to the method of sale. So if you have a property that's listed in the street and it's an open home and they're just open to offers, well, you can go in there and say, yeah, I'll offer you $650. Any of us could walk in there today and say, yeah, we'll give you $700 subject to finance, and essentially putting a clause on it to say, yeah, I can give you $700, but I don't have my finance approved and I will need to have that done. Now, that can often be okay and gets accepted, and then you go through the process retrospectively. Our preference is that you would have a pre-approval beforehand, so you know what your budget is and you know what that is, all before you actually get to the point of making an offer. Now, sometimes you might have a paper approval, a verbal approval, and then you might then still need to verify with paperwork afterwards. But at least you've had a conversation with a broker; they can pretty much tell you, yeah, you should be good for it. The key difference with auction is an unconditional sale event. So if you go to auction and you win the auction, you've got it, and you need to find a way to get the money. And that's when you go to the bank and say, oh, we won at auction and we paid $750, and they go, we're not going to lend you anywhere near that much. And then you've got from that date of auction till settlement to work it out. Or if you have to give it back and forfeit it, it's woefully expensive. Tens and tens of thousands of dollars is probably coming out of your pocket. So auctions are a different kettle of fish. It also is a reason why auctions sometimes can have a limited pool of buyers, because if people have to have pre-approval and things like that, then that can create challenges with it too. Again, the key to all of that is, if you want to be buying property, is be organised. Because if you can be organised that you can make a bid at auction, a private sale, an online auction, whatever it is, then you can be a player in all those markets, knowing that there's others who won't be as organised as you. So it just goes back to that preparation, understanding situation. And then when you say you do go to auction, you've got super high level of confidence about what your maximum is, because it's an emotional event, an auction. So again, that's where you want to know, right, I know my numbers. I know this is my max and I cannot go $1 over that. I'm not sure if I answered exactly with the concessions part of that, but around the pre-approval, I think speaking to a broker early is also key. They can also set the guide, like some sort of markers for you. They might say, yeah, you know what, Daniel, you can borrow 400, and you go, oh, probably need 450. How much more would I need to be earning to get to that? And they can say, right, well, if you were to earn this much more, then you could borrow that. So then immediately you go, right, I've got something to work towards. Yeah. And that's the key part, is you need something. And they just go, no, you can't afford it. And you go, oh, you crack the shits and you walk out, and that's it. Like, that's what would happen. And you think, oh, I'll never be able to buy a house. And they might say, look, you only need to earn an extra 4,000 or 5,000, then you'll be actually okay. Like, it could be such a small margin. So that's where good brokers will not just tell you what you can't do or can do, they'll tell you what you could do to improve that situation too.
The next one we had was a build versus buy.
Can we jump to one that I saw further, because I think this actually ties in well, is around debt and HEX and personal debt, and then come back to that, because it come to mind when I was talking, and I knew you had this on the list. So when they talk about borrowing capacity, HEX debts are an issue, and so are personal loans. So this is where sometimes you might go, I've got a $10,000 car loan and I've been saving really hard, and you go to the bank and they say, oh, we can only lend you this much. What they're looking at though is and your serviceability gets impacted by the fact you've got that car loan, and it's not just it comes off your total about allowable debt capacity, but it's a frequent payment that's coming out of your cash flow, and this one hurts people's soul sometimes. And it's the same with HEX debts. Is sometimes you got to whack them on the head and pay them off, and use your savings, and almost take one step backwards to then take 2 steps forward, because you get rid of that loan, then you save more, and then you build it back up quickly, and the bank likes you more. So sometimes you feel like, oh, I don't really want to do that, but it can blend in and fix your overall situation. Now, HEX debts have, and I'm not 100% sure on this, so I don't want to promise anything. They did change the rules around the assessment of that, and feel free to jump in if you guys know how this works. But so when you went to the bank, they would look at all of your ins and your outs, and that's how they would work out your serviceability. Now, last year, there was an announcement from the government that they wanted banks to disregard HEX debts from a serviceability point of view, which, again, it makes no sense to me. It's an expense. Like, if you disregard it, those expenses could be there for a decade or more. So you're going to have 10 years of saying that you don't have an expense that you do have. Like, and it could be, $200-$300 a week in some circumstances. So it's a lot of money. So our thought would be, you probably want to, whether the bank does or not, you want to factor that into your expenditure, like, because you want to know it's there. But again, that's one of those big things that has hurt people's serviceability over time. And I don't disagree with that. Like, I think that if you've borrowed money, whether it's HEX debt, personal loan, car loan, novated lease, whatever it is, like, you've got to pay it back. So it should come out of your cash flow. Like, it shouldn't have a carve out for those sort of items. Or we're going to end up with people who end up in like mortgage prison, where they get stuck and they can't do anything. And I often say to young clients, yeah, you could buy a home, but do you want to never leave it for the next 25 years? Because if you could maybe just scrape it in, but you will literally not have another dollar left over. Like, you can say goodbye to any holidays, any buying new clothes, going out for dinner. Like, you can say goodbye to everything else. So you have to weigh that up in that conversation too. Sorry to take you off track.
No, that's okay. No, it was a good branch out from there. So the next one we had on the list was the build versus buy. What are the pros and cons of both, and what concessions and grants are there for one or the other? So
I think I touched on at the start there a little bit. So, these get updated a lot, or have got updated a bit, and there's so much in government at the moment around them. So definitely check these out. But as it stands, when I looked again last night just to make sure, you'd get, if you were going to build a new home as a first home buyer, you'd get $10,000 to go towards it, which can be useful, but obviously it's not life changing in terms of $10,000 when you're talking about probably spending $650, maybe more to build something. Maybe there is less out there. I think, it's definitely a personal preference for individuals. I think the risk people run with building is that they don't always factor in all the extra expenses that go with it. So you might end up with a house on a block, but there's no landscaping, or there's no concrete on the driveway or footpaths and things like that. And that stuff can add up like a lot. And there's also the risk of other things that are outside contract coming into it, or variations and things that you make changes to along the way. So there's sort of like, in some ways, there's a bit of an unknown around it, which can be dangerous. There's also the fact that you probably got to continue to rent where you are while servicing a loan while that property gets built, which, building properties is relatively quick these days, but you don't know. I've had clients in recent years where the builder's gone broke and they've ended up having to drag out over an extra 18 months. So it's not to say don't build. It's just like you have to be really eyes wide open to those things. And you got to make sure you trust the process around the build and the structure of the loan and everything that's included in it. So it's really important to get good legal advice and broker advice around those things to make sure you're understanding your loan structure. So the benefit in my eyes of buying existing is you walk in there, like you see it, you go through it, you can have it checked from a building inspector's point of view. Location is often, it can be superior because in many ways we started building at sort of the core of townships and we work our way out. So often existing means it's maybe in a slightly better location than something in a new area. Now, there's new developments that are in good pockets too, so that's not exclusive. But I think the fact that you can walk into it and it's yours, and you can start paying it off pretty quickly, like, is undervalued sometimes. And people will say, oh, it's older, it's, maybe it's going to have maintenance risks. Like, you can assess those things pretty well. And as it stands at the moment, if you do sort of a comparison side by side, if you're going to go buy a block of land and put a house on it, it would be very hard to find one that costs less than buying an existing property, because the cost of construction at the moment is extremely high. Like, it's actually not right. Like, it should be, it should be whatever that is these days. Like, if you went and you spent $500,000 on a block and build, like, if you went to that effort of producing that asset in a way, like, you should be compensated by it being worth 550, 600 pretty quickly after that point. But at the moment, it definitely is not. Like, it's probably just worth what you've put into it. Whereas you could probably go and buy, I don't know, I had a client in Highton buy a house a while ago. The block value was probably 700,000 and the build of it was probably equal to that, and they paid $1 million. So it just doesn't stack up sometimes. So again, it's a bit of a rabbit hole, and there's different reasons for going to different properties too. So I know one of your points around taxation and sort of that stuff is more so investment property focused, but that's where new off the plan and stuff can sometimes have benefits as well. But that's probably a whole podcast in itself.
Maybe leading into, I guess, offset equity and redraw, something that gets thrown around a lot.
A lot.
Maybe just explain like what they are, how do they work, how do you access them?
Good question. So they're probably like three of those terms that people have all heard of, but most people actually have no idea what they are. Or a lot of people maybe understand like an offset or redraw. I'll talk about those two first. So an offset account is like a bank account that sits beside your home loan. So I always draw it up on the board as a really simple view. Let's say you have a loan for $300,000 and you have an offset account that's got $300,000 sitting in it. You will not pay any interest. It's offsetting any of the owing money, so you don't have an interest charge. But it is a separate bank account that's linked to the loan. It's not in the loan, and that's redraw. So if you had a $300,000 loan with $300,000 of redraw, you're not paying any interest, and you could pull the money back out. Now, people will say, well, what's the difference? There's slight differences, and it depends on circumstances, and it often depends on your future planning as much as anything around what you might do with that property down the track. Will it become investment? Do you plan to stay there long term? There's lots of factors that go into it. The key thing is when you set your loans up. So again, I know I've said broker a million times today. Like, the broker sets that up. The broker goes through a questionnaire. Sometimes that needs to be then loops back in with us because we maybe have a bit more insight around what they might be doing next with it. Offset accounts make a world of sense to me. Like, you can have, especially with banks now, you can often have like up to 10 offset accounts. So people like to use that sort of bucketing approach to cash flow and savings. Well, they can have their like long-term savings. They might have their car maintenance account, their dog account, their holiday account, their everyday spending, and their splurge accounts. But they're all offset accounts. So every dollar you've got in them is offsetting your loan. And people might say, oh, what about if I put it in a high interest savings account? Like, let's assume that the interest rate on your home loan's 5%, and you could get 4% and you can get 5% in a term deposit. You're unlikely to get equal. So they go, I can make 5% on this, or I can save 5%. Like, if you generate 5% income, you then declare it on your tax return. you're likely to pay tax minimum, probably 20% of that's going out the door. So you've just given up 1% of that return. So you only made 4%. If it sits in your offset account, there's no tax. You just save the full interest rate off your home loan. So it's very unlikely that if you're going to put it into an interest-bearing account that you're going to do better unless you've got a bit of a quirky situation. So again, get advice on that stuff. But I see a lot of people where they have savings in their accounts that aren't in their offset account where they probably should be. And I get why they're doing it, because it's just a lack of education. And sometimes loan structuring at the outset is also not set up correctly. And then equity is the other one, which is a bit more confusing. So equity is the part of the house you own. Like in simple terms, equity is the bit you actually own. Now, when you go into it, if you put down a 20% deposit, you've got 20% equity. What the ideal world is that over time is that grows, and that's where you create equity through the growth of the property. Now, let's say that it grows by another $100,000. That's a growth in your equity in the property. Then people will then access that equity for other purposes. Now, that's where it gets risky. That's where you've got to be careful, because people access that equity to do renovations, holidays, new car, caravan, and they just end up extending their loan out longer and longer and longer. If we're going to use equity, like, you want to have a strong purpose and probably looking at investment. But equity in simple terms is the portion of the property that you don't own, the bank doesn't own. It's your portion. So if the bank owes, you've got a $600,000 property with a $300,000 loan and $300,000 is yours, there's $300,000 of yours is equity, and there's $300,000 that the bank owns. So yeah, that's the really simple way to look at equity. So that's sort of a standalone thing. But then offset and redraw is essentially your savings mechanism. So you're saving your extra money into offset, or you're saving your extra money by putting it into redraw and putting it off the loan as essentially sort of prepaid payments. They both give you the same net result, and they both give you the outcome of you wanting to reduce the interest on your loan. So I think it depends a lot. It's really hard to even summarize which ones. There's no one that's better than the other. Offset accounts are probably more flexible, would be the only thing. But you want to have access to both. Like some very simple home loan options, this would be my only word of advice on this, is that sometimes people will get a really sharp interest rate, but it will be no redraw, no offset. So, and even with like fixed loans, you can't often have an offset or a redraw facility. So you might get a fixed interest rate, but you can't pay it off any quicker. So you get stuck with it for that period of time. So sometimes it's about looking past that headline interest rate number to go, okay, maybe the rate's 0.1 different, but I know I've got $50,000 that I'm going to be able to save and put off that loan, or I've got something else that's going on. So again, you just got to get advice, as boring as that is. Anything else we haven't touched on, guys? I know this was what you had mentioned around tax consequences, which it's probably maybe the more so around investment, I think I mentioned too. So, but maybe a good myth busting thing is like land taxes on investment properties. So not on your primary residence. So a lot of people, land tax is super topical. You're only going to have that as an issue if it's your investment property. So if you either buy another property or you moved out of that first one and into another one, then that one would become the investment property. So land tax is a significant expense, especially as you start to have multiple properties. But you don't have to worry about that on the one that you live in, which is good. I think the other thing that I would always just also actually with that on capital gains tax is most, again, not exclusively, this is definitely accounting areas, so you can speak to Friday around that and her dad. But that's around investment. So again, if you buy a property, you live in it for 10 years and you sell it and you never moved out of it, like most of the time you're probably not going to have a tax issue. Now I say most of the time because accountants can do some weird stuff, or people do some weird stuff sometimes that muddies the waters on that. But again, generally speaking, tax comes into it where investment comes into it. So land tax comes into it, capital gains tax comes into it, income tax and deductions and negative gearing, all that's in the investment sort of bundle. So that's a sort of one step removed. So I think if we're sort of thinking about more from owner-occupier, first-home buyers to live in, that stuff sort of one step removed from that. There's something else I was going to say, but I don't know what it was. So any questions? Anything we haven't talked about? I suppose it makes sense. My concern for young people is it's so super confusing. And even talking about this today, I'm like, I don't think I've done a great job of making it any clearer because there's just so many different factors. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. What does it feel like for you guys? been at that point. And even actually, my question I had in my head was, if even doing a uni course that is around finance, like how much of this stuff do you ever talk about or hear about?
Oh, nothing.
Literally zero.
Yeah. First
Which
home
is
buyer hasn't
concerning.
ever been mentioned at uni for me. Like, this is only something I picked up around here and, like, just in the news and that sort of thing. Like, that's the only time I've ever really heard about it.
Which is, it's concerning but not surprising. And maybe people would assume that at uni you talk about that stuff, but like at uni you will learn a lot about the fundamentals and the processes and things, which then when you learn these concepts you understand them more quickly. But yeah, it's definitely a gap, isn't it, in education for people of all, if whatever they're studying, whatever their background and knowledge base is. It's not really clear. Maybe people doing like hardcore property sort of courses, and then more so brokers who are doing like diploma level, or like some of them are doing bachelor stuff, but like it's a different realm altogether. And then those guys, the same with real estate agents, like they only have a very narrow understanding of that area. Like they don't necessarily understand all the things that flow out from that unless they've had life experiences in that as well.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think the biggest concern for younger people is from your, again, I'm going to ask young people that question. Like, is it deposit? Like, is deposit the scary part?
I'd say serviceability. Like, especially people coming out of uni, having a HEX as well, how much that affects. But yeah, I'd probably say serviceability, because I guess people can get a deposit, whether it's saving themselves. Sometimes their parents want to help out. But yeah, it's being able to service that with a job that earns enough of an income to be able to pay it off. So,
and I think have a buffer to live. That's probably the part that I would rather rent than not be able to do anything. Like some people would think that's crazy, but like if your life, you just end up housebound. And yeah, you might buy a house, but if you're borrowing 95% of it, like you've really bought nothing. You've bought yourself a massive debt and a whole lot of risk. Yeah, basically. And guess what? When the hot water system blows up, like you pay 100%. You pay everything. Like any maintenance issue, it's all on you. It doesn't matter who's guarantoring it or if the government owns a portion on it. They're not coming to the party to pay for that. It's all on you. So you need to have some wiggle room. Yeah, it's good being able to, paint them or, do some house, renovations and improve them, which is a really good way to add value to properties. But all those things cost lots of money as well. So I don't want to be too pessimistic, because I see lots of clients that do super well, like really young clients who are getting into properties, but they've been disciplined and they've had a goal and they've able to step through that. So I've got one client who I think he's 22 now, maybe. Anyway, I saw him. He's the son of one of my clients, and I saw him when he was like 17, and he just like got some saving stuff happening, and he was super disciplined, and he worked all the way through uni, saved, and then got pretty much into his first job, and pretty much straight away, like he had expectations of buying just something small, so he's probably spending a little bit less than what others would, but knows that it'll fit his needs for at least probably 5 years, and he's got the job, he's got the serviceability, like he's good to go. Like he was ready to go, but he was very disciplined and he had his head screwed on around it from an early point. And thankfully his mum introed me to him very young, so I could start to like push him in the right direction. But yeah, a lot of people, that penny drop moment happens later too.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything you can think of that we haven't covered?
I think you could hypothesize around lots of scenarios, and if we see lots of good and bad scenarios, and you guys will be starting to see that now, is that it is possible. It is a lot harder for people doing it on their own. That's a real challenge at the moment, and I'm not really sure what fixes that or alleviates it, but it's a fact, and there's a lot more people who do want to buy houses and do those things alone now too. So again, I know not to pump our own tires up, but just talk to someone, like get advice, whether it's coming to us to then send you to a broker, it's coming to us to then go and, I don't know, talk to a real estate agent, talk to a buyer's advocate, talk to someone, like start to gather information, because I think the people where they don't ask questions, they don't find anything out, they just get stuck in that circle and they just don't do anything. And then a year goes by, and then 5 years goes, and then 10 years goes, and then it gets harder. Like as you get older, they often end up starting a family, and then they're trying to buy a house, and then they're taking on a mortgage, say a decade later than they maybe could have, because they thought they couldn't. So just get advice. Boring.
Speak to someone.
Yes.
Do your research.
Exactly. Do your research first. Like even things like ChatGPT and stuff, they can be good, they can be dangerous, but read as much as you possibly can, because I find that people who have tried to do that part first before they come in, then you can see they're like, it joins the dots when we start to actually whiteboard it or talk about things. Someone who comes in and has never thought about anything, like you're starting from like a few steps behind, and then you've got to build it up. So
yep.
Yeah. Thank you for asking me to come on And
So
be a
thanks for
part of it.
joining us. Appreciate
Hopefully
it.
I can be back on again soon.
Absolutely.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you're keen to understand more about how financial advice could benefit you, follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Bourke Britton FP, or Google Bourke Britton Financial Partners. Check out our client reviews, testimonials, and make a time to meet one of our certified financial planners by clicking Book Now on our website. Thanks for listening.
Any information contained in this podcast is of a general nature only. No account was taken as to the objectives, financial situation, or needs of any particular person. Therefore, before making any decision, listeners should consider the appropriateness of any information with regard to their particular objective, financial situation, needs, and seek independent advice from a licensed professional specific to their circumstances.
That translates to don't be a moron and act on what some random person says on a podcast. Take personal responsibility, do your homework, ask questions, and speak to an actual human that knows what they're talking about before you do anything. PB Financial Solutions Proprietary Limited, trading as Bourke Britton Financial Partners, are authorised representatives of AMP Financial Planning Limited, AFS, licence number 232706.